Hi, everyone. You've just watched Girl, and I'm here to talk a little further about the film with the director Adura Onashile.
My name is Adura Onashile, and I'm the writer-director of Girl.
I wanted to talk at first a little bit about the way in which Girl connects to your previous works, because you made a short film. Girl's your first feature film, but you made a short film before called Expensive Shit. And that was an adaptation of a stage play that you made, if I'm right. Um,
Yeah.
so I can imagine that working on a feature film from scratch with Girl was a very different process than what you were used to in the past. And I wondered how that was for you, that process of mainly writing something for film for the first time.
Thank you. That's a great question. I think the thing I really leaned into um, for writing for film was obviously what a visual medium it is. Um, Often in what I had written for theatre, and in the case of Expensive Shit, there was a lot of dialogue to get the audience through the story. And with film, it felt so liberating because, you can tell a much more visual story. And the nature of Girl and the nature of what I wanted to look at in Girl sort of lent itself more to that visual aspect of film. Like there were a lot of scenes in the script with absolutely no dialogue. And for me, it's political to even sit with these characters and just watch them. It's not something I've ever really experienced in terms of the mother-daughter relationship from this point of view. And so it became really important to just sit with them and enter their world instead of everything always being propelled by action and story and plot. Yeah, so I found it really liberating. Often when we look at characters that are immigrants, a lot of the story can be about immigration. How did they
Mhm.
get there? Why are they there? What are they doing there? How long have they been there? All those things that become the way we define people. And I wanted the film to be liberated from that, which is why it doesn't spend a lot of time explaining those things. I really wanted it to feel experiential for the audience.
And when you say just sitting with these characters, would you say that that is something that you could have only done in a film?
I think it would have been, yeah, it feels to me like because film allows such a depth of mood and tone that isn't necessarily based on dialogue and action. Yes, it felt like the perfect medium to do that. Yes.
When you were directing on set, um, so for the first time directing a feature film, were there things in maybe working with the actors or working with your director of photography that were really, really different from your theater experience before? So maybe things that you thought you knew from the theater, but that you had to approach entirely different this time when working on a film?
Yeah. I mean, a big thing, a big learning for me was what you need for the edit. Obviously, in theatre, you've just got the widescreen, if you like, and you've just got one angle, really. And so the biggest leap I had to make was understanding that actually coverage of a scene involves so many different aspects, and your choices of how you cover a scene will determine how the scene is edited and what you end up with. And I think that, I'll be really honest, it wasn't something I knew enough about. And I was certainly relying on my editor who had worked with me on the short of Expensive Shit, and was the editor of this film as well. And she was sort of, as she was getting the rushes of an evening after the shoot, she was like, okay, so we need to think about coverage in a very different way. That was one side of it, but the other side of it is that I didn't want to cover the film conventionally. I wanted to spend more time in close-ups than I wanted to in mid or wides. Just because of this thing I say of wanting to sit with the characters and enter their world and feel really intimate with them, it felt important. So on the one hand, there were lots of things that I wanted to learn, and on the other hand, I didn't want to do it by the book and get conventional coverage because that wasn't what I was interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a big change. I guess the other change was that obviously most of the time on a film set is spent prepping lights and
Yeah.
and locations. You know, you would rehearse with your actors, get them prepped, show the scene to the crew, and then these long stretches of just waiting and knowing how to manage that in terms, and the actors, obviously actors are used to managing that, but I as a director managing that waiting before we could get going on shooting was something that I had to learn how to be patient with, definitely.
And when you talk about editing, were there things or certain scenes or certain moments that you really loved on set, that you had to completely rethink while editing the film, or
Yeah,
was it not
so
that difficult?
I suppose in a sense, I mean, I've only made one feature, so I don't
Mm-hmm.
know what it's like for other filmmakers. But in many ways, a script can feel overwritten by the time you get to an edit.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're trying to cover all these bases in your script, right? And then when you get your rushes, you realize that because you've chosen the right actors and you've cast the film so well, you don't they say everything in a shorter space of time. So there was a lot that I shot that I didn't need in the film. And that was quite liberating, but it also meant that we approached the edit, and I hear that this is a very different thing to do. I edited by feeling more than I edited for story. And I think that was because for me, this was first and foremost a love affair between a mother and a daughter. It wasn't so much about what happens next. It was much more about how their relationship changes tangentially through the film. Yes, outside forces affect that, but I wanted to concentrate on how they affected each other. And we kind of stumbled on this thing of kind of moving shots and moving the edit in terms of what things felt like, which is why I think the first part of the film feels a little bit like a meditation on a relationship. And then the second part maybe feels more conventional in terms of being driven by plot and story.
What was the casting process like? Where did you find these two women?
So I had a really brilliant casting director, Isabella Adolphin, who basically said to me, this is an immigrant character, so why don't we look further afield in the UK? So we started looking at actresses from Belgium, actresses from France, actresses based in Africa. So we really widened the net, and we came across Deborah Lukumwena, because I had seen her in a film called Divines, and she's just recently been in another one called Robust, and she blew my mind straight away. So that's how we got Deborah. And then Lashanti, we went through, the casting director went to schools, and Lashanti had only ever really done one other thing. She's very new and very green, but it was apparent to me from the moment I saw her on tape that she didn't need to say anything. In fact, the moments where she was at her quietest were the most endearing and the most emotionally kind of layered. Then I had a rehearsal process with just Deborah and Lashanti because I knew that I needed them to be very simpatico, and they needed to feel really, really connected, like two people who had spent all their time together. So I had a 3-week rehearsal process, just working with them in quite a theatrical way through the script and getting and helping them get to know each other before we began the shoot.
While you were on set with them, when preparing the scenes, I think the scenes with them together are really, really strong. You can tell that a lot of time and care is put into prepping these girls and getting them into characters and uh, trying to to build on what their relationship is like. So maybe you could tell us a bit about how it was like to get these women into their roles, and how you came in as a director into that while on set.
Yeah, so for me personally, all that work I had done beforehand with them was really useful. But what I come from an acting background originally, and sometimes I still act. I have a lot of respect for actors. I'm not one of those that I spend more of my time in the casting process. And then once I get on set and once I'm with actors, I sort of trust them. I trust them to get it right until they don't, and then I'll help them. But I think my feeling is always like the actors are also artists and collaborators in this process, and you trust them. They know the material, they've sat with the material, they've sat with you, and then you let them play. And then I would always try and get a slightly different version, but often they kind of knew what I wanted because we'd been through this process together. And how did we maintain that intimacy? To be honest, I'm not entirely sure, because it was quite crazy on set, you know, as it often is. But I think the work we'd done before had meant that they sort of felt these characters on a more visceral level, maybe, and were able to just plug into them really instinctively. And I know that Lashanti, the younger actor, looked up to Deborah. And so Deborah, you know, she would be playing around because she's 11. And then we would say action. She would look at Deborah and she would just clock and shift into Deborah's mode. And that was just because of the connection they had. It was beautiful. Yeah.
You sound very laid back as a director.
Well, yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I think that if I hadn't had the 3 weeks before the shoot started, I might have had a different attitude.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for me, I don't overload actors with notes. I give very precise and succinct notes, and then I trust. And that fingers crossed seems to work.
And when it comes to working with your director of photography, Tasha Buck, in this film, um, are you the same? Like you prep a bit with them, but you completely let them free on set?
No.
That's different.
That's different. I from the very beginning of this process, before Tash came on board, I had a visual document for this film. It's basically a pitch doc that I put together for how I wanted the film to look and how I wanted the film to feel. And it was so funny because way after the film has been out in festivals, I looked back at that document, and it was really, really satisfying to see that the film is like that original vision. And that was a document I shared with Tash, and thankfully she was completely kind of invested in bringing that to life. And so I really thank her for that. I mean, I think obviously film is a collaboration, and everybody that comes on board, you want them to elevate what you do, you know, and I think Tash was very good at elevating that document and seeing what I wanted tonally and in terms of feel and in terms of color. Not just Tash, also our production designer worked very well to that document in terms of I wanted this to be full of depth and color and texture. And I think they all did a really great job of that.
Were you always behind your monitor on set, very fixed on the frame, or were you more looking at what the actors were doing?
I think it was a mixture of both. It was a mixture of both. I carry around a very small monitor. I'm very into small monitors. I know people aren't, but I am. I like to be able to just visually see everything. I find bigger monitors slightly more distracting, strangely. Maybe it's because I'm a slave to my phone now. I don't know. But I really enjoy just having the image this close to me, and having the actors over there, and just being able to feel both things, see and feel both things at the same time. That felt, I think that's a really beautiful thing, because actually at the end of the day, what ends up in that frame is the most important thing. in one sense. Of course, the process is important too, but you're making a film. So what happens, what ends up in the frame is the most important thing.
The film is screened at quite some festivals already, so I can imagine you've already heard quite some reactions. Were there any reactions that you really liked or surprised you by audience members?
I'm a little bit shy of
Mhm.
hearing people's reactions. I'm sure a lot of people are. I have heard that people have been moved by it. I have heard the opposite. But I think for me, I am as interested in folk that maybe don't understand what we were trying to do as much as I am in folk that are, because I think that you can learn a lot from it. I think when it speaks to people, it can speak to people on a really intimate level. And when it doesn't quite go deep enough for people. So it's the complete opposite, like opposite reaction. So that's been interesting to me.
Mhm.
That people want to know more about the characters. And I, as an artist, will always say less is more. And I would always question why we need to justify sometimes what happens to characters in order to be able to sit with them and be with them. So it's been really interesting.
Thank you for this insightful talk. I'm sure this will ensure that the film will stay long after today with the
Oh,
audience.
I hope so. I really
So
hope so.
thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for showing our film. Thank you so much.